By the autumn of 1944, the Normandy campaign was in full swing, haunted by a single word that possessed the power to paralyse an Allied armoured column. It wasn't a poor tactical command or a geographic obstacle. It was a name: Tiger. This wasn't mere superstition. It was Tigerphobia or tiger fever, a psychological contagion born from the brutal reality of the Panzerkampfwagen sex. At the village of Vimetier, the rusted husk of one such predator remains today, a silent witness to a machine that didn't just breed fear, it turned tons of steel into scrap. But while the fear was universal, the encounter was a rarity. This is the story of how 1,347 tanks held an entire coalition hostage. I want to separate the steel from the myth. Why did every German tank become a Tiger? And how did a machine so few in number manage to conquer the minds of the men who may never see one? The Tiger was a reaction to failure. Early in the war, German anti-tank guns found themselves helpless against heavily armoured Allied tanks like the Soviet T-34s and KV-1s, British Matildas, and the French Char B1. With one Char B1 hull number 225, the Eure, commanded by Captain Pierre Belot, receiving around 140 hits in the Battle of France in 1940, only falling silent when it eventually ran out of fuel, but not before destroying 11 Panzer IIIs and 2 Panzer IVs, which would firmly place it in one of the best kill-to-loss ratios of the war. Hitler was furious and demanded a land-going battleship or breakthrough tank. The first prototype was scheduled for his birthday on the 20th of April 1942. It was far from smooth sailing, with it having been completed merely moments before it was shipped for its initial trial in front of the Führer. As I'll go on to later, the Tiger I would never be a well-polished, reliable machine. But this was not a mass-produced weapon. It was a 57-ton statement of engineering. Its production time was roughly twice that of any other German tank. It was over-engineered, expensive, and plagued by design flaws that often took months to correct. Despite this, when it worked, it was devastating. It was designed to punch through first, knocking out threats to which the lighter Panzer IIIs and IVs were vulnerable. With its appearance in 1942, Allied guns simply did not cater for the Tiger's 100mm frontal plate, let alone its 120mm mantlet. The gap widened with the wider adoption of the American 75mm round, which was designed for high explosive support against soft targets, rather than tank-on-tank duels. Allied crews would watch in horror as their shells produced little more than sparks, bouncing harmlessly off the Tiger's hull. British testing on a captured Tiger in Tunisia revealed that German steel was 13% more resistant than comparable British plate. The standard 6-pounder couldn't penetrate the Tiger's front even at 300 yards. In contrast, the Tiger's 8.8cm gun could render Allied tanks vulnerable at 10 times that distance. There are documented accounts of Soviet IS-1 tanks being knocked out from 4,000 meters away. Often, Allied tanks exploded into flames before they even located where the fire was coming from. There are even instances of Tigers taking hundreds of hits and still remaining functional to some degree, like I showed you in the video about Tiger 231 having taken 252 hits of all calibers, but still being able to withdraw 37 miles to a maintenance area. Its resilience was almost supernatural early on. The lethality of the Tiger's 8.8cm L56 gun was visceral. It would render everything it would face even after World War II vulnerable. The British would test a captured Tiger and found that 5 shots fell within a group as small as 16 by 18 inches at 1,200 meters, and not only that, its velocity meant that it sliced through its targets as though they were toys. In the case of this victim, the Massawa, oblique angle hits didn't ricochet, they penetrated, and still managed to penetrate with such force they continued to rip through the internal superstructure, with enough residual force to knock the applique armour off the opposite side of the vehicle. Velocity really is the king of penetration. By 1944, the Allies were finally starting to fit guns to their tanks that stood more of a chance against the usually better armoured German tanks. The Russians' response was the T-34-85 with its 4.645 metre long ZIS S-53 gun. The British would mount their homegrown formidable 17-pounder gun into a Sherman tank, being nicknamed the Firefly, and the Americans would mount their 76mm M1A1 or M1A2 high-velocity gun into Shermans also. However, these modifications carried a deadly price. German crews were trained to identify and eliminate the longer-barreled tanks first, essentially painting a target on the crew's back. British troop leaders often refused to command from a Firefly because they were always the first target selected. Crews resorted to painting counter-shading on the barrels, wavy white paint on the underside to trick German gunners into thinking they were looking at a standard, less threatening 75mm Sherman. A machine is only as good as its crew, and Tiger crews were an elite caste. Due to low production numbers and the high value of the tank, only the very best were selected, then receiving 6 to 12 months of specialised training. This elite training gave birth to tank aces like Michael Wittmann. His actions at Villa Bocage represented the peak of the legend, the unmistakable roar of the Maybach engine in the early morning mist, followed by the systematic destruction of a British column. Yet, his grave at Le Combe in Normandy serves as a sobering reminder. As formidable as the Tiger was, it was not impervious. On the Eastern Front, the Tiger terror was even more intense. When the Tiger first appeared at Leningrad and later in mass at Kursk, it forced the Red Army to rethink its entire armoured doctrine. The Soviets were forced to rush the development of the Su-152, nicknamed the Zveroboy, or Beast Killer, simply to have a mobile gun capable of shattering a Tiger's armour through sheer kinetic force, even if it couldn't penetrate cleanly. The infamy of the Tiger far outweighed its physical presence. As I mentioned, only 1,347 were ever built. Compare this to 84,000 Soviet T-34s or nearly 50,000 American Shermans. Spread over thousands of miles of front lines, a Tiger encounter was statistically improbable. In the entire Western European campaign, US armoured forces were confirmed to have engaged Tigers only a handful of times. However, it is important to remember here that not only did the Germans outclass the Americans in terms of range and optics, but they were also on the defensive, and it was in their interest to conceal themselves as much as possible. Getting caught in the open would have been fatal. Why then did everyone report seeing one? Well, a Canadian intelligence officer in July 1944 stood by a knocked-out Panther and asked passers-by what it was. With no exception, they described it as a Tiger. The boxy silhouette of a Panzer IV was enough to trigger a panic also. German tanks did, after all, share a very similar silhouette until the arrival of the Panther tank, and eventually the majority were upgunned to high-velocity tank killers, meaning that an encounter with most late war variants would be a concern. Furthermore, even the heaviest late war Allied tanks, like the Jumbo Sherman and the M26 Pershing, remained vulnerable to the Tiger's gun until the very end. But the Tiger's weight and design was its own undoing. While it claimed 11 kills for every one lost in combat, that ratio drops to 5-1 when you include those lost to mechanical failure or even simply running out of fuel. Sometimes the only hope against a Tiger was a mobility kill. Tiger 131, the world's only running Tiger today, was captured only after a lucky 6-pounder shot from a Churchill ricocheted off the gun barrel and jammed the turret ring, and the crew abandoned the tank. Allied doctrine made it worse still. Crews are often trained to radio for air support or artillery rather than engage. This avoided casualties, but cemented the idea that the Tiger was an unbeatable monster, and encounters like the Villa Bocage incident only served to add more fuel to the fire. Ignoring the fact it was a horrific tactical blunder by the British, a single Tiger still decimated an entire column with ease. But let's not forget the elephant in the room, German propaganda, said by some to be the best the world has ever seen. They were only too happy to parade victories or rewrite defeats in front of the camera. So powerful and important was their propaganda that aces of any kind were often withdrawn from combat to protect them as valuable state assets. They even refused to concede that Michael Wittmann had fallen in battle due to a tank-on-tank engagement, instead using the narrative of a cowardly air attack. The Tiger was a legend built on genuine lethality but sustained by a ghost story. Whether sitting in the fields of Normandy or parked in a museum today, it remains the ultimate symbol of Tigerphobia, the war's most successful psychological predator. It is easy to see why Allied tank crews feared German armour so much. Sheer numbers may win a war, but precision will take a devastating toll.